Dear God, blow upon us with a fresh wind, that our sight might be renewed. Amen. Rabbi, say the disciples to Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, this is a question not unlike the one that goes, when did you stop beating your wife? Because, it backs Jesus into an impossible corner, pressuring him to agree that one or the other choice is the answer. Jesus' disciples presume, you see, that blindness comes as a result of somebody's wicked behavior. Is it the parents or the man himself? Do you buy this stuff? Of course you don't. It's just plain offensive. By 21st century standards, it's entirely laughable, except that many folks, many religiously conservative folks still believe this kind of stuff. At bottom, it reveals the values and assumptions, you see, of an ancient era when not a few, but no, almost everyone believed without question that sin was the principal cause of disease and disability and of being left with no money any time in your life. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he got the coronavirus? Most everyone believed that sin and sickness, or misfortune, as I was saying, were inextricably linked. Everyone but maybe Jesus. Now, for background, you need to know that the Bible does not speak with one voice. You can often find texts in total opposition. You have to read it to figure this out, but if you do, you can't come up with anything else as a real answer for my money. On this matter, the matter of the cause of the man's illness, the book of Proverbs in the Hebrew Bible tells us that if you are well and you are rich, it's because God has blessed you. And conversely, if you are poor and sick, it's because you must have sinned. And if you are blind, you must have sinned a real whopper. This is why the disciples asked this puzzling question. But there's also a book in the Hebrew Testament that objects to this understanding and objects to it strenuously. It's the book of Ecclesiastes. And there the writer says that whether you are rich and healthy or sick and poor, it's all a matter of pure chance. Chance happens to everyone, it says. Coronavirus or blindness can happen to anybody. I love this about the Bible. It's a living library of books that often correct one another. It's the record of a lively debate that has been going on for thousands of years, and Jesus clearly sided with Ecclesiastes over Proverbs. He did that for two reasons. First, he did that because he had a highly developed common sense. He would not allow the conventional wisdom of the day, if you're sick, you're necessarily bad. He wouldn't allow that conventional wisdom to override what his eyes and heart told him about the world he lived in. Secondly, he did this because he saw the rich were often ganging up on the poor and blaming the poor for their own troubles. The wealthy used the puny theology of the book of Proverbs to blame those not as lucky as they were. And Jesus knew the human heart so very well, and this is part of what made him so unique. In 2009, Gunnar Serda, the father of an autistic child and a pastor in Ohio, wrote an article for Sojourners magazine entitled, quote, Who sinned that this child was born uninsurable? Very interesting title. And note, this is before Obamacare. Reverend Gunnar Serda knew from his own experience that what it was like to be blamed for his child's disability and to be refused medical coverage because of what's called a pre-existing condition, even a condition pre-existing the child's birth. Now, what parent with a disabled child has not wondered what role he or she, genetically speaking or theologically speaking, might have played in his or her child's affliction? It's a terrible question, and one seldom uttered aloud. Well, Jesus does not buy the presumption of the disciples about sin causing blindness. In response to their question, he says the following: "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed through him." And then, without explaining further what he meant, he proceeded to take some of his spit and some dirt from the ground and made it into a poultice to rub on the man's eyes. The scene then changes to the pool Jesus sends him to, where a controversy begins. The crowd there questions whether it really is the man born blind or just someone who kind of looks like him who wasn't blind at all. So they ask him to explain how it is that he can see, which he does. But the crowd is not satisfied, and in time they take the now sighted man to the Pharisees, who hear his story. They do not like the fact that even though Jesus has done a good thing, he's done it on the Sabbath day. And so they surmise that if Jesus is not observant of the Sabbath, this healing can't be from God. Can you believe this ridiculous rot? Then they decide that they should call the blind man's parents as witnesses, because the Pharisees still don't believe that the man was really blind from birth. And at this point, you can't help but feel that this poor, formerly blind man is feeling a bit like chopped liver, right? Nobody is celebrating the fact that he can see. All they want to do is criticize the source of his healing, and by implication, him too. The Pharisees ask his parents whether he was really born blind or whether he had just been faking it all these years. Well, the parents are shy folk, frightened by this religious inquisition and terrified to be testifying even on their own son's behalf, so they throw the ball back to their son, saying that he can speak for himself, and thus they throw him under the bus. The blind son is called then to testify, and the Pharisees start out by telling him that the one who healed him must surely be a sinner, so he better fess up to the truth about this healing. To which the blind man says, "Look, I don't know whether he's a sinner or not, but one thing I do know: once I was blind, but now I see." Such a beautiful, courageous, clear statement. It is so resonant, it shows up later in hymns that we sing. Well, the Pharisees are infuriated because they cannot get him to say what they want. So in disgust, they throw him out on the street. And in the final scene, in a conversation with Jesus, Jesus tells the man that he now can see at two levels. Not only has ocular sight been provided him, but now he also sees with the eyes of faith. So there are two levels of healing at issue here: physical and spiritual. For Jesus, the easier of the two is the man's physical sight. The more difficult matter is healing the theological blindness of the Pharisees and the crowd, and even his own disciples. Because again, they bought the conventional wisdom that if you're sick, you must have sinned. Well, this is the reason that John tells us this whole story in the first place. What Jesus and John want to do is to get our eyes, we who read this story, our eyes open to a reality that is right in front of us. They would like us to change our focus and not worry so much about sin and whose sin caused what, but rather to notice where it is that God is breaking into the world. Now, please don't misunderstand me here. I'm not saying that someone's disability exists because hidden within that disability or disease is a blessing in disguise. This all goes off the tracks if you go that way. No, any God who uses human suffering and brokenness to glorify himself or herself is nothing less than a capricious narcissist. But Jesus wants us to know that in spite of the presence of human disability and disease, God has not abandoned us. That it is possible to discover in the midst of the challenges of life, including illness and disability, that God may be right there transforming our lives. So let's go back to the disciples' original question. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It is inevitable that we want to make sense of our lives' experiences, right? We want to know why it is that we suffer the ills that we do. And sometimes, in spite of ourselves, we pose the question in terms of blame, right? But to satisfy yourself with blaming others or God is to blind yourself to what may be deeper and more relevant and more resonant from that experience. Anna Carter Florence names this harmful fixation of ours by drawing two different scenarios, both of which I am personally familiar with. First, she describes a young couple who sit in the doctor's office at a fertility clinic waiting for information on what's going on with them. They've been trying to get pregnant for 2 years, but with no success, and now they want to know why. The week before they came in for the battery of tests that should give them some answers, Anna says, the doctor looks at them and sees tension in their faces, how they're unable to look at one another or hold hands. And she knows how this couple must be framing their questions. Is my wife the one? Is it her inability to conceive? Is my husband the one? Is his count too low? Is it her organs that are malfunctioning? Is it his stress that is interfering? The doctor opens the folder in front of her and takes a deep breath. The question hangs heavy in the air. Whose fault is it that we can't have a baby? And then Anna Florence Carter poses another scenario. It's your 25th high school reunion, and you can't wait to catch up with your old friends. It's been years since you're all together, and everyone is there, everyone except Brad and Beth. Aren't they coming, you ask? And your friends shake their heads silently. I guess you haven't heard, says one, breaking the ice. Brad and Beth are divorcing. And you sit in stunned silence. No, not Brad and Beth. Was it an affair? Was it a midlife crisis? Did he hit her? Was she drinking? What happened, you whisper. Not even sure you want to know the truth. And there is that ridiculous question again. Whose fault is it that this marriage didn't last for 60 years? I suppose it's inevitable that we should try to understand the cause of the mysteries and complications of life. Whose sin caused this man's blindness? Why there's a problem getting pregnant? Who ruined this marriage? The husband, the wife, or their parents, right? But the fact is that Jesus has no time for these questions. He changes the subject. He asks us to focus our sights on something deeper, to understand life at a totally different level than we have understood it before, perhaps. He wants us to look for God in the places where we have been looking for blame. He wants us to look for God in the places where we are looking for the easy out of blaming something or someone. So let me offer a real-life example of how such a window on God and God's glory, in fact, as Jesus speaks of it, can be opened. I saw Itzhak Perlman with our organ symphony just a month ago, and he's on my mind. Some years ago, you may know about this, at New York's Lincoln Center, Perlman was ready to take the stage, and he's usually the last person in place because though his fingers are amazing, his legs just don't work very well. And so he was struck with polio at the age of 4, right? And he is in a wheelchair now, but then at Lincoln Center, he depended on crutches to get around and braces. Well, that night, he sat down, placed his Stradivarius violin under his chin. He was scheduled to play Brahms' Violin Concerto, one of my very favorite things ever. And just a short time into it, the sound of a string popping echoed through the hall. Everyone could hear it. Well, protocol permits a musician to call for a pause, hurry off, and replace the string. But Perlman waved at the director to go on. And by instinct, he transposed the music to 3 strings instead of the 4. And he continued to deliver the music with purity and passion. And some minutes later, having finished the first movement, he lowered his violin, totally exhausted. And the audience sat in stunned silence for 8 seconds, and then they just rose to their feet as one to cheer. And then the man with 2 busted legs and 1 busted string rose to speak. And he said, all my life, it has been my mission to make music from that which remains. You look at that thing, you take it in, and it can give you strength to face all your own disabilities, all your own set of challenges. It gives you faith again in the resilience of the human spirit and in a purposeful, redeeming creator. You can spend your whole life trying to lay blame, find fault. Most people do that. Or you can spend your life doing what you can with what you have, whatever it is, whatever you find yourself up against. And by doing that, you know what you do? You glorify your Creator, whether you believe in one or not. So let me close with one more reflection from this story. Note that the blind man was not healed immediately through Jesus' action with the mud and the saliva, remember. He had to find his way through Jesus' direction to the pool at Siloam. He had to show himself to a set of religious authorities. It's been observed by other interpreters of this story that the healing happens not where the man meets Jesus, but rather afterward, on the way to the pool. Healing happens not all at once, but on the way, in the process. It gives one hope that maybe the healing we ourselves need will happen similarly, the one we're looking for now, right? Not in dramatic fashion, say at a faith healing meeting, the floor covered with sawdust, the so-called healer hitting you on your forehead to jolt your head, leaving you reeling. No, maybe the healing takes its own sweet time. And in the interval, we do a little bit of growing, and deeper healing has time to take place, take root, make a difference in who we are and how we see this crazy world we find ourselves in. When I was bitten by ticks and got Lyme disease back in the summer of 2000, I tried antibiotic after antibiotic. I had them all. I prayed for healing. I only got worse. And over 6 years of struggling with that, having gone down dozens of avenues, I became my own doctor because no one could really help me. And I found my own complex method of treatment, which finally knocked it down and eventually, still years on from there, knocked it out. But those first 5 or 6 years, they were mostly wandering in the wilderness, clueless. But now looking back, I wonder if anything else in my whole life made a more profound difference in making me who I am today. I can't think of another thing. Like those who witnessed the healing of the blind man, I kind of had to let go of some things I thought I knew about being sick and being well in order to embrace a whole new way of understanding what those two states of being mean and don't mean. And I bet a lot of you have walked a similar path. This whole world of ours is in a wilderness period now, right? We've all got Lyme disease. I wonder how we might find healing going forward for the whole planet. I mean, what healing might we, in fact, be on our way to? How might we, in fact, see differently once we get there? Amen.